Greetings everyone! Welcome back to the increasingly inaccurately named Man Cave Guitar Pedal Mania. I think about half of my videos are me in the shop now, and it's really inconvenient to carry the camera back and forth between the man cave and the shop. Maybe I should have made a second channel, but hindsight is 20/20 and all of that. Okay, in my last video I was staining up the body from this Wilkinson Ultimate Guitar Kit that I got from StewMac.com. Now, I was using the green stunning stain from Crimson Guitars, and frankly, it wasn't doing it for me. Their green is very, very teal. So, I did things the old-fashioned way. I took some of their blue stain and some of their yellow stain, and I mixed it to make a green. Now, because I'm not still very good at filming everything, I didn't think to actually film myself doing that. But this is the color now that I have on the body. What I wanted was an organic, mossy green. It's a tint that I'm quite fond of, and I think it'll look good once I put the clear coat over top of it. So you've got the matching headstock. Let's see, provide a little more color contrast here. I've painted the walls in the shop surf green, so it can be a little hard to see. Or perhaps seafoam green. I get those confused. So I think that looked very, very nice. Now, my finishing kit from BYO Guitar, I buy their Wudtone kits. And my father watches all these videos, and he asked me why I didn't just get one of their coloring kits to go on the guitar. Well, just a whim. I wanted to try staining it. Who knows? I mean, I would have got a different color using their color kit, although I really quite like this color of green. That turned out well. Now, what I have done is I have bought clear, just colorless. This is what it starts off looking like. 40 milliliters of oil, wax, and who knows what all else. Stuff goes on clear as water. You just wipe it on. It'll take several coats of that. It's not a quick process. Each time that you finish it, it has to dry overnight. And then a top coat, which I have chosen a satin top coat, which I think will look good. Again, I want this to be an organic looking mossy green when I'm done. Now for the neck, I have gone with vintage amber. So I am tinting the neck. I have done necks before that were just plain maple, and they are really just shockingly bright against any colored guitar. I think they look horrible. So I hope that the vintage colored amber tint looks okay on this neck. And then again, you just have a top coat that goes over top of that. So how does this stuff work? I'm going to be putting the body on my helper here in a bit, but I will do the neck just here at the table. So let me set this aside. So Wudtone sends you, or BYO Guitar sends you a couple of rubber gloves, or I should say latex gloves. I think they send you one per kit, which is completely inadequate. I'm not really sure why they bother. So before you apply any kind of tinting, you want to make sure that your neck is very finely sanded. And this one came already very finely sanded. Do not have any complaints about the sanding on this. So we then take a rag, and I'm just using an old t-shirt. You want to shake your tint well. Make sure that everything gets good and mixed up. Okay. Now again, the moment of no return. You want to put this tint on evenly. Oh. Before I do that, I am so sorry. I want to tape off my rosewood because it does have a rosewood board. You don't want to get tint on the rosewood. Tape is not a perfect solution, but it's much better than just trying to eyeball it with the cloth and making sure that you don't get any overage. So I'm going to tape this up. I'll pause that for a minute and be right back. Okay, I've got it taped up now. Get a close-up on that. As you can see, that is a very thin line of tape. And try and burnish it down as much as I can. I also wonder, hopefully that tint will not get into the side dots. If it does, there's not really much I can do about it, having made the decision to tint the neck. So, now, back to what I was doing. They recommend first going over with a swirling motion and some pressure. You want that tint into the wood. Also, you know, I will say they talk a lot about the wood breathing and how, you know, it's wood tone because it affects your tone. I personally think that's all snake oil. It's just marketing talk. Guitars are made of dead wood. They don't breathe. They will absorb moisture though. And that's what you want to do with any of this, is seal off the moisture content. Now notice, even though it's quite tinted on the rag, it does not impart a heavy tint onto the wood. Try and get a couple of different angles there so you can see the difference between the tinted and the untinted. So the idea is it's just supposed to give it the look of having a lacquer that has yellowed with age a little bit. Like I said, if you go with just a plain white maple, it can really just be shockingly bright. Now I will also note for anybody that has respiratory issues, I have a lot of respiratory issues, which is one reason why I don't like working with paint, even though I have a little home spray booth. You know, guitars are painted with auto paint. Nitrocellulose lacquer and polyurethane are extremely toxic. They are solvent-based paints. And even with a breath mask, I get a lot more exposure to fumes than I think is good for somebody with my issues. Something like this, it's got a little bit, that was too much. It's got a little bit of an odor to it, but it is nowhere near the same level as working with a paint product. So, I don't know how big an issue that is for anybody who might watch these videos, but I can't be the only person who likes working on guitars and has respiratory issues. Okay. Just a tiny little bit of overage there on the headstock. I really desperately want to not get this vintage tint into that green. go. Now the thing about the color coats is it's really just to taste. So I'll give you a lot of this stain. Notice how after just a little bit it starts to sit on the surface. And that's when you know that you've got enough for the coat. You want the wood to absorb the tint. If the tint is just laying on the surface, that means you are done tinting. You need to let that soak in and cure, and then come back in and do subsequent coats. You do not want to attempt to rush the process and put a lot on at once. It's counterproductive. Try not to leave any dead spots. They also recommend that you do your finishing swipes. You do swirls as you're initially applying it, and then you finish it off by going with the grain. That makes sure that you don't have streaking. Again, on a neck, that's not really that difficult to do. On a body, especially if it's a carved top, that can be a little tricky sometimes. And yes, I do the end even though you can't see it. For a nice uniform appearance. Okay. I like that. Okay, again, not too dark, not too yellow, but enough to take that shockingly white maple out of play. All right, well now there's nothing for that but to let it cure for probably overnight. For subsequent coats, they say to come in with a little steel wool. I have 4/0 steel wool, and I'll come back and rub it down. And I really like that color, but here's the thing. When you put the steel wool on it will take some of the tint off. So I will let that cure up overnight. I'll come back with the steel wool tomorrow and go over it. And yes, I think that looks pretty good. And again, see, I've got the tape on the fingerboard, so I don't have to worry about it. So there's my green headstock and the amber neck. All right. Now, to the body. But first, I need to install it on my StewMac Painter's Helper. Can't remember the exact name of the product. I'll put a link to it at the end of the video. Or I should say, underneath the video. Okay, I've attached to the body to this StewMac Painter's Assistant. Just wish I could remember what this thing is called. Third hand or an extra hand or something. And the process is really going to be the same here. Hate it when the foam sticks to the top, because that means it'll never seal back up. There's one thing about these products. Do not expect them to have much of a shelf life. They're going to dry out and just be done with. Okay. On a small but usable amount on the cloth. Again, you want to shake it up, even though this is clear. Put this at a little bit of an angle and just start applying it. To begin with, I'm going in a swirling motion. You can see I've got a little green tint coming off. That is inevitable when using stains. I do not recommend doing this, but I'm doing it anyway. Apply a little bit, swirl in, keep those circular motions going, apply a little pressure. Doesn't really matter if you do the back or front first. I'm just doing the back first because it is the larger expansive wood. Welcome back, everyone. Yesterday, while I was working on applying the Wudtone finish to this project, my SD card filled up and at some point it stopped recording. I don't even know exactly when that happened. So, my apologies. That's what you get for watching an amateur channel. So, I'm starting off brand new. I have one coat of that Wudtone clear on this body. To prep it for more, I've got some 4.0 steel wool, and I'm just going to go over it super lightly. This isn't really a sanding process. We're just knocking off any high spots from the finish. And giving the new finish something to adhere to. So, while I'm doing that, I wanted to mention, again, you can see how irregular my color is here. Specifically, back into the armrest, it's a very different absorption of the green pigment, which does not bother me at all, but I know it drives some people crazy. If you use a paint product or even the full colored Wudtone finishing kit, you get a better result than that because it is what they call building. If you're not familiar with that term, finishing products are referred to as low build, moderate build, high build. Stain is a non-building product. The building literally means that you raise it up above the surface of the wood. A polyurethane or nitrocellulose lacquer is a high build. Whereas a stain is non-building, it is absorbed into the wood. The Wudtone finishing product is kind of a combination of those two. It does have a pigment for dyeing the product, but then it also has that wax and oil which then builds up. So when you start off, you would have sort of an irregular color, but the more you add to it, you're no longer coloring the wood directly, you're building on top of what's already there, and it gives you a more uniform appearance. I'm okay with that. I knew what I was doing when I stained this, and I am perfectly happy with it. Also, get a close-up on this neck. I'm still deciding whether I want to put another layer of the aging pigment on this because I kind of like that now, but I think I will go one shade darker. So I'll do that after working on the body. So just in case, I haven't looked at my footage yet, so I don't know exactly where it cut out. I cut a little square of cloth out of my old t-shirt here. If you were working with paint, you'd have to be a lot more concerned about getting lint into the product. In this case, you really don't have to worry about that too much. So we have the colorless base. It has no pigment in it at all. It's clear like water. Looks a little wet when it goes on, and then it very quickly just dries and leaves basically nothing. So I usually start with the back because it's got more wood to go over. And again, I apologize if this is a repeat from yesterday. Wudtone suggests that when you first apply the finish, you apply it with a swirling motion to get good coverage. And again, you can see there's a little bit of green dye coming off, but not a lot. But I do, before I apply the final finish, I want to reach a point where there is no green dye coming off on the cloth, because that means I will have this clear completely built up over the green underneath. And that is what I want. I don't want to put the clear coat directly over the wood. I want to put the clear coat over this Wudtone finish. I'll be fast forwarding through this part in the final video. You work in small amounts of material. Can't really hurry the process. Although sometimes I cheat just a little bit and apply some directly onto the body. They don't recommend doing this. If you work with some alacrity, you can get it taken care of. Now I can start to see, I don't think I'm going to be able to get a shot of this in the camera, but I'm starting to see where the finish is starting to sit on top of the other finish. And that means that it's taken as much as it's going to in this coat. So when you reach that point, you wipe off your excess along the grain lines. You don't want any pools of finish sitting on the wood. Wudtone says this finish is self-leveling, but to get it to do that, it has to be a very thin coat. And at this point, as it's drying, you do not want swirls. You just want it to go with the grain. So you can see it's a little shinier and wetter. And there's still the matte finish from yesterday where I haven't applied any. Alright, this process is just going to go on like this for a bit. So I'm going to pause my video here, apply this clear to the rest of the body, restain or put another layer of the aging pigment on the neck, and then I'll probably come back tomorrow morning, see how it's doing, see if I'm going to put a third layer of the clear on this, and then I'll start the video again when I'm going to put the top coat on it, and we'll see how that goes. This is a super quick update. I've just put the third coat of that clear finish on. Now the reason that it's important to put the clear finish on before I apply the top coat is to seal in that stain. If you can look at this rag, hopefully you can see that there are just a little bit of green on it. And I'm going to keep applying that clear until there's no green stain coming on onto the rag, and then I'll apply the top coat. At the same time, take a look at that. The clear also gives it a depth. And I've only put 2 applications of the aging amber on the back of that neck, and that's good enough for me. I don't want it like a dark amber. I just want it to not be so shockingly bright. So when people talk about depth in color, that's not simply a perception. That's based in physics. It's all about the clear coat that goes on top of your paint. Your color coat can be just a few microns thick, but the clear on top of it is what gives your eye depth. It's weird, even though you can't see it, it's literally clear. Your eye does perceive the depth and richness of it. If you really want to know about paint, don't talk to guitar painters. Talk to car painters. Well, for one thing, if you don't know, guitars are painted with auto paint. Nitrocellulose lacquer wasn't invented for guitars because of its amazing acoustic and sonic properties. All of that is just a bunch of hoo-ha. It was built to paint cars. And then later on, they changed to polyurethane, which is much, much harder and dries much faster. So it's a better paint in all respects. And no, I don't care if you're a vintage guy and you think nitrocellulose lacquer makes your guitar sound different. You know, maybe it does. Maybe it modifies your 2500K spectrum just a tiny little bit. You know what? Your pickups, your strings, your amplifier, they make huge differences in your tone. If the paint makes a difference at all, it is tiny. So it's all about the way it looks. So I like the green, but I also want that depth. And to get that, well, I need the clear coat, but I need the sealant on it so I also don't lose more stain. So it's got that dual purpose. And I think that it is succeeding marvelously in giving me that organic green that I prize so much. So I cannot wait to finish this up, but I probably have another 2 or 3 days of applying the no tint top to it before I begin the top coat. I'll start doing the outer coat on the neck before that because I've finished the color coats on it. I'll go into more detail on that in the next video. Welcome back. I'm pretty happy with the way the clear is going on, and I think it is time to do the top coat. I really like the way that color has turned out. You know, if it was just the color that mattered, I would leave it exactly like this. But the problem is that it has no protectant on it at this point. It's really simply a color. So I need to put the top coat on it. That'll give it a moisture seal, you know, if nothing else, just from the sweat of my forearm as I play it. But it also helps seal it off from humidity and ambient moisture. The process is basically the same. Now, I bought satin top coat instead of gloss top coat. No particular reason, it was just a whim. I almost wish I had bought gloss because this green looks so good. But I also think that gloss products just never quite measure up if you're not going to buff them out. And if I wanted to bother with buffing out, I would not use this type of finishing product. The mechanical process of this is exactly the same. You wipe it on, use a nice swirly motion so that it gets into the pores, apply a little pressure. Hopefully you can see that that cloth has no green on it. So that clear base coat has done its job of sealing in that green stain. It doesn't really matter how pretty something is if it stains your clothes every time you try and play your guitar. Alright, like I said, this is exactly the same process as it was before. You just put on a thin coat, let it dry overnight, come back, hit it with some steel wool, put on another thin coat, and continue until you like your final result. So I'm not going to film all of that. I will come back when I have the entire thing finished and show you the result. Alright, I've got enough finish on this finally, and take a look at that. This may be the first time in a long time where I have no caveats at all about how this process went. I've got about 4 coats of the top coat on this now, and even though it's a matte finish, that green just pops right off of that body. That is spectacular. So at this point, it's got enough finish on it that you can't feel bare wood. You do not want to feel bare wood on these. That means it's not sealed. So with the matching headstock, that'll give us a strat that looks like that. And I think that is spectacular. See, the aged neck means it's not so shockingly bright when you turn it over, that vintage tint. Yeah, now we are a long way from done with this project. It's very interesting to me what they've done and not done with this kit. They did not drill holes for the pick guard. They did not drill holes for the cover plate that goes over the trim system. They did not drill a ground wire hole. I still don't understand that. I looked at their instructions and it says to run the ground wire through the hole, but there's no hole. Their instructions, I will say, are very good. I'll get to that in another video, although bizarrely missing some things like installing your tuners. The parts that it has in excruciating detail, so that's good. The next step will be to install my my bridge studs. Usually in a studded bridge, I would ground it to one of the bridge studs instead of grounding it to the tremolo claw, even though in a tremolo guitar it seems to be the common practice to ground it to the tremolo claw. But since they have in fact not provided me with a hole, it's a lot easier to drill through to one of these studs. Maybe I'll do some research online and see if that is a possibility. We'll make some other things a little more difficult. There's always pros and cons. So, don't know how this is going to turn out once the hardware is on it, but I can tell you aesthetically, I love it. So, there you have it. That is the Wilkinson Modern-S style kit. A combination of Crimson Guitar Stunning stains. Now again, I mixed the phthalo blue and their amber in order to get this particular green tint. And then Wudtone finishing products, vintage tinted neck, and this is a satin finish for the body with a Wudtone clear that I put over the green stain. So, there's a lot of work left to go, but I can't wait to get at it. Hopefully you'll keep joining me. Until then, I've been Reed, and this is Man Cave Guitar Pedal Mania.